My brother made my birthday party get cancelled because he asked my dad to go fishing with him that weekend, but when they came back, they cried their eyes out because of what I told them. My brother made my birthday party get cancelled because he asked my dad to go fishing with him that weekend, but when they came back, they cried their eyes out because of what I told them. 2 weeks ago, I was about to celebrate my birthday. Unfortunately, my awful younger brother decided he wanted to go away for the weekend without me, and the party ended up being cancelled. My brother, who is 15, is my dad's favorite, and whatever he says goes in this house. There was some balance while my mom was alive, but she passed away from lung cancer a couple of years ago. Since then, life has been terrible for me because my dad only seems to care about my brother and thinks that since I'm older, I can handle everything on my own. Even on my birthday, I had plans to go out at night with my friends, and obviously, my dad was going to fund all our plans. But just a day before my birthday, my brother threw a tantrum and told my dad he wanted to go away for the weekend because he'd been rejected from the football team and desperately needed something to distract him. If you ask me, it wasn't surprising that he wasn't selected for the team because not only is he incredibly spoiled and annoying, but he's also not a good player and has no sense of teamwork. That's obvious, so it shouldn't have been surprising to him that he wasn't picked. But still, he had a massive meltdown over it, and my dad had to give in. I was in shock because all of this was happening right in front of my eyes, and I decided to stand up for myself. I told my dad that I wasn't going to stay home while they went away for the weekend, especially not on my birthday, of all days, because this is usually what happens. Whenever my brother decides he needs time away, he and my dad go off on a getaway, and I'm left at home. They both really enjoy fishing, so they go on fishing trips, and my dad has a friend with a cabin in the woods, so it's pretty easy for them to just leave. I'm not really a fan of outdoor adventures, and I definitely don't like the woods, so I'm nothing like my brother and dad. In the first few times this happened, I offered to stay home. After that, whenever they needed to leave, they didn't even ask me if I had my own plans, and I was left to deal with their absence. This has been the case since my mom passed away. They never used to do this while she was alive. I don't have a problem staying home alone per se. But the issue is that I'm not allowed to have anyone over because my dad thinks that if I throw a party or something like that, I'll end up wrecking the house. And he's pretty strict about those things. Once, I made the mistake of inviting a couple of friends over, and we were very careful to keep the house clean. But my dad decided to check the security cameras and found out. I got the lecture of my life the next day, and he told me he didn't want me inviting my friends over when the house was empty because he didn't trust us since we were young teenagers, and that never leads to good news. So I couldn't invite friends over, nor could I leave the house on my own because my dad thinks that's dangerous, and I'd end up staying home when they weren't there. Obviously, I didn't want that to happen on my birthday because that would mean I couldn't have my friends over, nor could I go out with them. It was my 18th birthday, for crying out loud. It was an important day for me and I wanted it to go my way at least once. But my brother couldn't even let me have that, and my dad even offered to take me with them and hire someone to look after the house for the weekend. But my brother insisted that he wanted to go without me since I'd never been to the cabin, and I wouldn't know anything, so it would be another task to introduce me to everything. He was sure I wouldn't even enjoy it. Also, if I were there, he couldn't distract himself from what was happening at school since everyone would be congratulating me on my birthday, including some guys from the football team because I'm friends with them. So my dad even withdrew the offer to take me, and I was left at home. These kinds of things have been happening since my mom passed away. It's always been obvious to me that my dad has a favorite, and it's not me. I never had an issue with that. But that day, I just lost my patience. I started yelling at my dad, and we had a huge fight because of how he was acting and how he had been treating me since my mom passed away. He never praised me even when I achieved something big like winning competitions or doing well in class, but my brother got compliments for even the smallest things. He also behaved very differently with us. He was pretty distant with me. And with my brother, he was a completely different person. He actually acted like a parent with him. I had always tolerated it because I knew my brother was very much like him. So it was easier for him to connect with my brother, but that wasn't a reason to treat me like this. So I stood my ground and said that if he left me home alone on my birthday and didn't let me invite my friends or even go out with them, I would do whatever I wanted, and they couldn't stop me. But my dad threatened me and said that if I did any of those things, he would cut my college funds, and I'd be left with nothing. I'm supposed to start college in a couple of months, so I couldn't take that risk because I don't have my own money. So, unfortunately, I had to let them leave on the morning of my birthday, and I had to cancel all my plans. My dad told me that if I wanted, I could go out with my friends as soon as they got back, and he'd give me money for an even bigger party. But that didn't comfort me because I wanted to go out with my friends on my birthday, not spend the day alone at home. So I was really upset all day and didn't do much until I fell asleep that night. The next morning, however, I woke up to a surprise because someone started ringing the doorbell very early. When I went to see who it was, I realized it was my grandfather. My dad's parents passed away when he was young since they were quite old, and my dad is the youngest of 4 siblings. They weren't exactly very close to the rest of his family, so after his parents passed away, we only spoke to and saw his family during the holidays. However, I used to be very close to my mom's parents, and we met quite often when she was alive as they would come to visit us whenever they could. They live in another state, so they had to fly here to see us, but they always said it was worth it. After my mom passed away, however, things changed and became even harder for my grandfather because 8 months after losing my mom, he also lost his wife. They were in a car accident, and my grandmother fought for her life for a couple of days before succumbing to her injuries. My grandfather is paralyzed from the waist down and has to use a wheelchair to get around. Over the past 2 years, I've only been able to see him once a year during the holidays. It's been quite hard because he used to be so full of life, but after losing his wife and daughter, he has become very quiet and sad. Of course, everyone feels sorry for him, but he says that makes him feel even worse because he doesn't want people to pity him. So I try to act like myself around him, even though seeing him makes me want to cry because I just miss the person he used to be. That's part of the reason why I've never told my grandfather about my strange relationship with my dad and brother. I didn't want to make things even harder for him. Sharing that with him would only make him feel bad because he wouldn't be able to do anything about it, and I didn't want to make him feel even more powerless. So every time I've visited him over the past 2 years, I've only focused on the happy things. But the day after my birthday, when he showed up at my door with his nurse to surprise me, I ended up breaking down because I got so emotional. A lot of family members had sent me birthday wishes, but for him to come all the way here just to surprise me was something that really touched me. Knowing that not even my brother or dad would have done something like that for me is what made me start crying as soon as I saw him. I got so emotional, and he had to comfort me for a while before I could thank him. I tried to play it off by saying I was just moved by the effort he made to fly out here despite his limitations with the wheelchair and everything. But I guess he realized something had gone terribly wrong, and after a while, he started asking me where my dad and brother were. Initially, I tried to make excuses for them. But honestly, I was exhausted from trying to hide the fact that they were just terrible to me. So I told him the truth, and he looked genuinely shocked. After processing it, he started to look more angry than surprised. He told me that if I wanted, I could live with him for the next few months until I started college. To be honest, that would actually be easier for me because I decided to go to college in another state since I needed some space away from my dad and brother. Coincidentally, my university is closer to my grandfather's house than it is to here. So if I stayed with my grandfather, I would only have to drive a couple of hours to come back home. Whereas from here, I would have to take a round-trip flight, and it's not like they would miss me here. My dad has my brother, and my brother has my dad, so I didn't even have to think twice before accepting my grandfather's offer. He told me he would leave as soon as my dad and brother got home because he had some scores to settle with my father. He stayed with me that day, and I told him everything that had been happening over the past few years since my mom passed away. It was like the floodgates finally opened, and I had someone to share all of this with. Of course, my friends knew about it, but it's not like they could help, and they all have their own problems. I'm not close enough with the rest of my family to talk to them about this, so it wouldn't have made a difference anyway. When my grandfather asked why I had never told him anything, I explained that I didn't want him to feel bad. He told me he would have fought for custody, but honestly, it would have been very unlikely for him to get custody of me because it's not like my dad was actively abusing or neglecting me. But he said he would have found a way to help me and that I should have told him earlier. Anyway, I hadn't told him before and this was the situation. I had to endure the situation for a long time, but this was the final straw. And my grandfather, fortunately, was here to finally get me out of it. So the next day, when my dad and brother finally got home in the morning, they were in for a big surprise. My grandfather normally treats both my brother and me equally since he's not my dad, but this time, he didn't even bother to greet my brother. He didn't even wait before confronting my dad about what had happened and what he had heard from me. For the first time in his life, my dad actually looked ashamed of himself and seemed nervous. I knew for sure that he had always wanted to impress my grandfather. Even when we visited him after my mom had passed away, he would make a big show of treating my brother and me well. But I had no idea he was so scared of my grandfather, and I liked the fact that for once, he had to answer to someone for the way he had treated me. Anyway, after scolding my dad for a couple of minutes, my grandfather told my brother and me to go for a walk because he had some things to discuss with my dad privately. He didn't want either of us to come back home until he called us again. It was confusing, but it was obvious we weren't supposed to argue at that moment, so we both left the house. My brother and I aren't exactly friends, so we went our separate ways for about 45 minutes. He was at a friend's house, and I was at one of mine. When my grandfather finally called us back, he seemed to be in a foul mood and was very angry. When I walked in, it was obvious my dad had been crying because his eyes were swollen. That was shocking because my dad rarely cries, and I knew something had definitely happened. Anyway, my grandfather told me to pack my things, just the important ones, and that the rest would be picked up later. So I did as he asked, and about half an hour later, I had a bag ready. Then we took a taxi and went to the nearest hotel. There, my grandfather told me that from now on, I would be living with him. It was very convenient because, as he had said, it meant I would also be closer to my university. So I had no issues with that. But when I asked him what had happened with my dad, he said it wasn't my concern at the moment, and that he just wanted me to focus on my future. As I was leaving, I noticed that my dad hadn't said anything to me or even said goodbye. My brother didn't seem to care either. So that was that. 2 days after I moved out with my things, my grandfather and I took a flight to his house, and I've been living there ever since. I didn't think I'd hear from my dad or my brother anytime soon, and I had stopped wondering what had happened between my grandfather and my dad because clearly my dad was happy enough to let me go. But that changed 2 days ago when I received a message from my dad apologizing for everything, saying he hadn't realized I felt neglected. He acknowledged that he had failed as a father and admitted that he hadn't even noticed because he was so focused on my brother, the only child he'd managed to connect with. He said he had always considered me very different from him, which was why he kept his distance from me, because he didn't think he could understand me. But with my brother, it was different. He added that not building a good relationship with me was the biggest mistake of his life. He realized this, thanks to my grandfather. I already knew all that, so it didn't surprise me. Honestly, I wasn't even bothered by the fact that he was closer to my brother than to me, as I had been closer to my mom than to him. What I didn't like was that he had treated me poorly and didn't even realize it, but I guess he figured it out after I moved out. He told me he really wanted to apologize and make things right. He said he knew I'd moved in with my grandfather now and planned to stay with him until I finished college, but he would really like me to come home so we could talk and work things out. And according to him, that's what my mom would have wanted. I think I agree. It's probably what my mom would have wanted because when she was here, she was always pushing my dad and me to spend more time together, but we never listened to her. However, I don't want to commit to anything right now, so I haven't responded to my dad's message. To be honest, I'm not even sure if I want to repair my relationship with him at this point or not. I haven't started college yet, but it's only a couple of weeks away. Even when I do, I only plan to return to my grandfather's house on alternating weekends, so that would be more convenient than going back home. And it's not just about convenience. It's also about the relationship I have with my grandfather. I don't have that with my dad or my brother, so I don't feel compelled to return home to them to try to fix things. But on the other hand, if he's trying, shouldn't I try too? I've been feeling very conflicted about what my dad said, and I don't know what to do about this situation. Would I be wrong if I told my dad I don't want to move back in with him and want to stay with my grandfather? Edit. Honestly, I don't know why my dad would want me to stay at home. Whenever he and my brother went on fishing trips, he used to say it was dangerous to leave the house completely empty. Even when we went on family trips while my mom was alive, he would hire someone to house sit. As for whether I'm my dad's biological child or not, I don't know how to answer that. I've heard about people treating their adoptive children differently from their biological children, so I wouldn't be surprised if I wasn't his biological child. But no one has ever said anything to suggest I'm not, and I don't have any paternity test results to prove otherwise. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm definitely his child. If you ask me, I don't even think it matters if I'm his biological child or not because he's the one who raised me along with my mom. Biological or not, I'm his child in some way, and he should have respected that and treated me the same as my brother. Anyway, that's not the point now. Update 1. After much deliberation, I decided to ask my grandfather if I'm really my dad's biological child. I couldn't stop thinking about it after several people in the comments suggested that maybe he treated me differently because I wasn't really his child. There was also a comment about my grandfather mentioning trying to get custody of me if I had told him how my dad was treating me earlier. I started thinking that he wouldn't have said that unless he had reasons to believe he could have gotten custody. So I felt I had to ask. It took a lot of courage, but in the end, I felt I deserved to know the truth. Last night, I sat down with him and just blurted out the question without overthinking it. He was taken aback, but then told me he knew this was going to happen at some point. And although my mom had always tried to keep it a secret, I was old enough to know now. It turns out I am definitely my dad's biological child, and we know this for sure because multiple paternity tests were done to confirm it. Apparently, my paternity isn't the issue but rather an incident that occurred before my birth that probably caused my dad to resent me. My dad had been neglecting my mom because of his work before I was born. They'd only been married for 2 years at that time and together for 4. She always regretted it, but my mom ended up having an affair with one of his friends, and my dad found out about it. She ended the affair, and they agreed to go to couples therapy. But a couple of weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. The only problem was that she had no idea who the father of the baby would be. My dad wanted her to terminate the pregnancy altogether, but my mom didn't agree. So they had to wait until the pregnancy reached a stage where a paternity test could be done. Until then, my mom's lover was part of the process because the child could also have been his. If it was, my mom said she didn't want to be unfair to her future child and said the three of them would have to raise the baby together. My dad obviously didn't agree with that idea and insisted that only he and my mom should have custody of the baby, regardless of who the biological father was. But my mom wanted to be fair, and that led to a lot of arguments between them. They decided to stay together because they really loved each other. But that ended up being pretty bad for me because even though I was my dad's biological child, my mom cut all ties with her lover after they found out. That didn't seem to be enough for my dad. After I was born, a couple more tests were conducted to ensure that I was absolutely and 100% his biological child. And I was. It had been confirmed. Despite this, my dad continued fighting with my mom until she threatened to leave with me. Now, obviously, I'm not saying my mom was right. She definitely shouldn't have cheated on my dad and should have tried to talk to him about their issues before seeking love outside the marriage. But if my dad decided to give her a second chance, he should have tried to make it work instead of constantly fighting with her. I think he's a really conflicted man because even though he chose to stay with my mom and work through her infidelity, he couldn't handle it and decided to channel all his anger and frustration at me. The fact that I was nothing like him in terms of personality probably irritated him even more. And so, we ended up in this situation where he really resented me for something that wasn't my fault. When my mom was alive, he seemed to get along with her well enough, so I never would have guessed they had issues like this in the past. But I guess it makes sense if you consider that he had me to resent, so he didn't need to take his anger out on her. Anyway, that's part of the story. The reason my dad seems to feel so guilty for how he treated me in the past is that my grandpa told him he was going to cut him out of the inheritance. My dad's inheritance had to be divided into 4 parts because of his siblings, so he didn't get much back then. But after my mom passed away, my grandpa apparently changed his will to leave everything to my dad and his grandchildren. However, after my grandpa found out how my dad had been treating me, they had an argument, and my grandpa really gave him a piece of his mind. He told my dad that he was very sorry that his daughter had cheated on him, but that was no excuse to still hold it against me because none of it was my fault. I wasn't even born when it happened. Even though I was nothing like my dad, I was still his biological child, and that had been proven through several paternity tests, some of which my dad had even conducted independently without my mom's knowledge, so she couldn't interfere with the results in any way. So there really wasn't a reason for him to behave toward me the way he did. And yet, one day he decided he wasn't going to treat me like his son and would instead punish me for what my mom did. That wasn't acceptable. And my grandpa told him that after learning about how I was being treated, he could no longer expect anything from him. Now, any portion of the inheritance that my dad was supposed to receive would go to me instead. My dad had been crying about that, and also because he felt like he was going to lose everything at once. So when I asked my grandpa if my dad was reaching out to me because of the inheritance or if he was truly sorry, my grandpa told me he genuinely didn't know. For what it's worth, my grandpa told me my dad seemed genuinely upset, but I still don't know if he has ulterior motives or not. It's very hard to trust him after everything that has happened. So I guess I'll continue not responding to my dad until I'm sure. Update 2. Well, I'm in university now. I started a couple of weeks ago, and it's been going very well so far. Though it's only 2 weeks in, so who knows? I forgot to update you about what happened with my dad because, honestly, after the message he sent me, nothing really happened. I didn't respond, and he didn't bother trying to contact me again. So I guess he was only reaching out because of the inheritance. If he truly felt bad about everything, he definitely would have made another attempt to reach out to me. It's now been almost 4 months since we last spoke, so I don't think he's going to try contacting me again anytime soon. As for my brother, we were never really close when we lived together, and now we have no contact at all, and I'm more than fine with that. The only family member I still keep in touch with is my grandpa, and we talk every couple of days on the phone. I was a little mad at him for keeping these things from me, but on the other hand, he was just trying to do the right thing for his family. I don't think I would have been able to handle the truth earlier, so he was right not to tell me before. At least I'm an adult now and can process this. If I had found out about my mom's infidelity earlier, I don't know how I would have reacted. Knowing about her past has definitely changed my perspective on her, but not in a way that makes me hate her now. It's just that I realized she was an imperfect person and not the perfect mom I had idealized. But that's okay. I'll always love her because no matter what she did, she's still my mom. Anyway, that's all I think. Update 3. I wanted to share a significant update. I'm about to graduate in a couple of weeks, which is exciting and a bit overwhelming at the same time. However, this joy has been somewhat overshadowed because my grandpa won't be able to attend my graduation. About a year ago, He'd been dealing with some long-standing health issues, partly due to an accident he had a few years ago. Despite everything, he was always a strong and optimistic person. But his body just couldn't hold on anymore. It's hard to accept his passing since he was my biggest support through all of this. As for my family, I still have no contact with them. However, I recently received an email from my dad congratulating me on my upcoming graduation. I guess he found out somehow. In the email, he shared a few updates, including that my brother is still living with him even though he's now 19. Apparently, my brother didn't get into any of the universities he applied to, and instead of going to a community college, he decided to look for a job and see what the future holds. I thought about whether I should reply, but in the end, I decided not to. Right now, I'm content with how things are, and I don't want to reopen old wounds. Besides, he didn't even attend my grandpa's funeral. I guess he held a grudge against him for cutting him out of the inheritance, and the only reason he's emailing me is to try to get me to share it or something like that. Now that I'm writing this, I think it's best to block his email, just like I blocked his phone numbers years ago. Also, I'm about to finish university and move to another state since I got a good job, but it's in a different city. There's no risk of him showing up at my place one day or anything because I won't tell anyone who might share where I live. As for my grandpa's house, it's been rented out this whole time and will continue to be. I don't have a use for it now, but I do have memories there, so I'm not sure I could sell it. Not that I make much from it since the person managing it, doing repairs, showing it to people and all that takes a good portion of the rent. The rent itself isn't very high either, but I don't really have another option since I don't live in the city to handle all of that myself. This is probably my last update since there's nothing else to share, at least related to my dad and brother.